I always think of the church as a little microcosm of the story of the village. And it's very easy to upset people about their church in a village. But certainly when we go around churches, we're looking for certain things. And I think probably the main lesson that people need to remember is that really in the past, certainly before 1750, people had no real concept of sort of heritage or anything like that. And the main aim was to have the latest, up-to-date, the biggest, the most fashionable of whatever it was. So that if your church is an absolute gem of an Anglo-Saxon structure or an absolute gem of a Norman structure, we might appreciate that. But what that means in the history of that community is nobody cared a damn about that church after 1150 or whatever. Because if they had have done, and they've had the money, they would have torn it down and built another one. So that, you know, the church is a reflection of the interest and the money and the spare money and the attention of the local community and the local lords.
Just out of interest, Mick, what comes first? Is it a village, then a church, or a manor house, then a church and a village?
Well, the simple answer is we usually don't know. But if your sort of historical research shows that, for example, you've had a Minster church, a very important local church before any of the others, that probably came before a village. And often the village is bolted onto that. But in the vast majority of cases, we think that the church is a private building put up by a local lord in, say, the 12th century. So it's right next to his house, the manor house, and it serves his family and it serves his family and the local village community. But it's usually very difficult to say what the origin is. It's a little bit easier to look at the actual building and ancillary stuff and say something about how it's developed. And there are three things really. You look at the site that it's on. Is it next to the manor house? Is it in the village? Is it out in the fields on its own? You know, what actual site has been selected? What is the structure of the building? And it's partly that business of how much has been invested in it. I mean, a lot of churches are a complete mishmash of people adding bits, punching new windows and doors in, patching old ones up.
Is Pevsner useful for
Oh
this?
yeah, super Pev. Start with Pev, you know. And they're being revised now by Bridget Cherry and others. So, yeah, you get your Pevsner Buildings of England ex-county and see what he says about it. It's the best, quickest little lead-in. And the introductory essay at the front, which says the best Romanesque churches are, the best early English churches are, the best Saxon fonts are, the best inscribed stones are. You need to know all that stuff. In case your village is one of those.
So the second one...
The second one is the structure. The third one is the fittings, because things like the font, the pulpit, the altar, altar rails, chancel arch, all the bits that you look at will give you some idea of how much attention's been paid for it, how much upgrading's been done, whether there's a big local family or not, you know, how many tombs are there in the chancel, so on and so forth.
One of the things I rather enjoyed was that one or two churches we looked at had got pubs right next door to them.
Yes.
And we talked and did a bit of a programme at one stage about church ale.
Church ales,
what was the connection?
Yeah.
What is the connection between pubs, which are sometimes close or almost like parties?
In the churchyards, some of them, you know. Well, it's because the church raised money in the Middle Ages by brewing ale and selling it at what were church ales, which were like, you'd have almost like a village fete today, but the money went into the church. And because of it, there's often a room or a building nearby, and it might now be called the St. George or whatever, but its origins are as a church building. Lots of them in Somerset, almost all the village pubs around.
You can't help thinking that a kind of a reinstitution of that tradition would sort of do wonders for...
Well, yes. I mean, the other one is, of course, that the church building, particularly the nave, served as a village hall. I mean, it gets very tied down in late medieval Georgian Victorian times with all the pews and so on. But before that, it was an open space. You know, there was very little place provision for seating. You know, the eldest and the weakest went to the wall to lean on the wall. You know, everybody else stood around, and that open space could be used by the community.
And the idea of singing hymns and doing all those things.
Yeah, I'm not sure when that came in. I mean, there's a huge literature on this, but it's not as simple as the, I think, basically Victorian version we have. You know, and I mean clearly people gathered round for baptisms. You know, the font is often the oldest feature in the church, and it's sort of saying to everybody, look, we've got a Norman font. We were there in 1100 or 1200, and we had that right then. And I mean, the other rites of burial, you know, the people outside, and as you were hinting at earlier, it doesn't take much, you know, to work out that if you have a village or a parish with a population of 200, and the generations change every 25 years, in no time at all, you've got tens of thousands of people buried in this churchyard. Where the hell are they all? I mean,
there should be sort of head-high bones.
They should be stacked deep, you know, like that. And I mean, part of the reason that churchyards are often higher than the roads around, or even than the church building itself, is that periodically it looks as if they brought soil in to give themselves another layer to bury in. But of course, so few churchyards have been excavated that we don't have much detail on that.
We've got to get Mick back to the site now to see what's going on with our castle on the hill, another sort of iconic feature.
Absolutely,
really,
yep.
Bed of bluebells, which I need to get some hay fever tablets.
Yeah, well, Teresa's got some tablets.
To be continued.
Yeah.
What's the next
buildings we should talk about.
Buildings
we should talk about, yeah.
Time we catch Mick, we're going to do buildings.
Yeah, vernacular
so I hope
buildings.
You enjoyed it, and we'll catch up with you later.